everyone, Ripley with Bob's Watches. I'm here with Justin in the studio for a very special video today. We've each selected 5 watches at 5 different price tiers, and we're gonna go head to head to see who's got a better selection. We're also excited to announce a giveaway, so be sure to stick around until the end of the video so you can get all the details on how to enter that.
All right, Ripley, before we start, should we do a little wrist check? Tradition?
So I'm probably wearing my favorite current production Panerai, 42
like
mil
that.
submersible, blue bezel, black dial. It's got this kind of interesting sort of Velcro strap.
I like the
thing,
strap.
which is my preference, either rubber or that for a dive watch. I like Panerai's design language. I wanted to have one in my picks just because I think the Luminor is one of the most recognizable just silhouettes in general. But you know, gotta choose between your children here. And so although I couldn't get one in my lineup for this one, I did want one for the wrist check.
I'm actually wearing the Air King.
Actually very close to my heart.
A little bit smaller size. Yeah, this one's the 34 millimeter.
It's like we swapped watches this morning.
It is like we swapped watches. But again, this is one that I really wanted to fit into my lineup. I just couldn't quite pull the trigger on it. I mean, we'll get into all the choices later, but this one was a very close contender, and if it couldn't make it, I wanted to give it some love, so it got the wrist nod today.
Likewise, as someone who actually owns the 5500, and that was my real-world decision here, I thought about picking it, but went a slightly different direction, and again, we'll get into the reasons why later, but fantastic choice.
So, should we start with our first category?
Yeah, well, let's go over the categories.
Okay.
So 5 different price tiers. We've got under $2,500, $2,500 to $5 grand. $5 grand to $10 grand, $10 grand to $25 grand, and then open budget, $25 grand and up. Literally, sky's the limit.
That will be a fun one.
So, well, let's see what we got into. And of course, one thing to remember is everything's respective within its price category. So it might be in the 5 to 10, but where something falls at $5 grand and change might be very different from $999.
Right.
So I think everything sort of has to be put in context of how much it actually costs versus, you know, the price tier as a whole.
Absolutely. And we're also talking about real world prices here, secondary market. We're talking about what you can actually go out and buy these watches for.
Right,
a lot of these are on a long wait
Steel
list.
Daytona isn't 13 grand. It's actually open market price. So this is all open market prices, you know, pre-owned sector.
Yeah, no wait list, none of that. So let's get right into it. First category, $2,500 or less.
Yeah, so on this one, I mean, honestly, there's fantastic watches from a couple $100 all the way up to $2,500, but I wanted to choose something a bit on the lower end because I think you can get a ton of watch for your money without going towards the higher end. So I chose an Oris Divers 65. This is the 42 mil, and I think if I was actually going to choose one for myself, I would choose one of the 40s. It just fits my wrist a little bit better. But I chose the 42 mil here because I really like this silver dial and wanted to feature it in the video. And of course, it comes on a bracelet, which I think if you're going to be buying one at this price point, get the bracelet. It's a nice bracelet. It's kind of a solid link rivet style, and I think it goes well with the watch. And again, price point on these is about $1,000, maybe a couple $100 more.
Right.
So we're really on the low end of that. You can buy literally 2 of these. You can't decide between sizes or colors. Get 2 for the $2,500, and I think, you know, Swiss movement, easily serviced. These have a Solida base in there, 100 meters water resistant, sapphire crystal, nice stainless steel construction, screw down crown and case back, kind of all you could ask for, and you can have your choice of a billion different colors and materials.
That's it too. I love this choice. Partly for that reason, like you said, this is the 42. You'd go with the 40. They have an even smaller version if you're into
36
that.
and 38 in bronze,
Yeah. You like the bracelet, which I personally like the bracelet too. This one is really classic to me, right? It's very styled off the original look, and you know, it does it really well. The bracelet's nice. The bezel and dial are nice the way they're designed. But there's also a million different variations if you want, you know, blue or oxblood or black, or there's even bronze case. I mean, there's a lot of watches that fit in there.
Candy pink, the cotton candy dials. Yeah, it's one of those ones where if someone wants to get their feet wet with Swiss luxury watches and wants something that they can buy now is going to scratch all the itches, but is still going to have a place in their collection regardless of where that may go, I think this is an awesome pick. Choose the size that fits your wrist, choose the color and material that you want, but you know, there's going to be one that kind of strikes your fancy no matter how you lean. And then whether or not you end up with a bunch of 6 figures, Pateks and RMs, it's still a great watch that can exist on its own merits, and that even if you end up with this multi-million-dollar collection, it's still a fun watch that you can strap on, and it's not going to feel like you're just cutting corners. It excels at its price point for what it is.
It's very versatile. Also, bonus points, it looks good on a leather strap. Close your eyes and pick a strap, and it probably looks good on this one. So, you know, it's got a little spot in my heart for that.
If you are going to go, a part of the reason why I choose the 40, it fits my wrist better, but it also has standard 20 mil lugs. One thing to note, if you're choosing the 36 or the 42, it's got the odd sizes, 17 and 21, I believe. So just something to be aware of. But again, yeah, it looks great on so many things. And it's a dive watch that gives you the features of water resistance and just the and like a rotating timing bezel, but it's not so overbuilt to the point where it's like you feel like you need to go grab a regulator and get underwater.
It's a good choice.
What do you have at this price point?
I did something a little different. I am glad that I went the way I did. So I'm going with the Omega Seamaster.
I didn't even know we had an Aqua Terra under
exactly.
2500.
Yeah,
Okay.
Omega Seamaster Aqua Terra. It's the quartz version, which to me that doesn't really bother me. I mean, I've talked about it before. I love automatic, but I have no problem with the quartz. And to me, this is just so much watch for the price it is. I mean, the Seamaster is such a classic line, right? I mean, you know, it's been around forever, and you know, it's a really good one watch. I've said before, I'm not a one watch guy. If I had to be, this might just do it. I mean, it's really versatile where, you know, you could dress it up, you could dress it down. It's technically not a dive watch, but it's very, you know, it's part of the Seamaster line. It's very at home, you know, on a boat, in the pool, whatever. You don't really have to worry about it. Like if you are going diving, you know, it's 150 meters.
Very, very capable. Yeah, you and I have talked at length about the Aqua Terra. I think it's super underrated as a whole within Omega's catalog. People hear Seamaster, they think dive watch, but it is kind of the go anywhere, do anything watch. It's dressy enough, you can pair it with formal attire. It's sporty enough, you can take it in the water. And again, for that person who doesn't want to have a bunch of watches, worry about power reserves, anything like that, rate of deviation as far as timekeeping, it's a set it and forget it piece. And for me, I'd choose the midsize as well. I think it's a dressier model, having a larger dial to case ratio sort of lends itself well towards one of the smaller ones. It's got a smaller wrist anyway, Panerai notwithstanding. And that's a cracking pick.
And $2,500 like max to get into, you know, a brand like Omega and, you know, watch like the Seamaster.
Well, that's the other thing. You're buying the legacy. You're buying the legacy. It's one of the premier watch manufacturers, and I mean, it's a really versatile look. I love the gray dial.
I love it. I love the gray dial too. I mean, again, there's other choices in colors. This one's. It's nice that there's a lot of options to choose from. Personally, I do. I love the gray. I think it's really.
And I think it's also worth pointing out that you can, you know, with $2,500 budget, you can buy a brand new Oris. You won't be able to get an Omega Aqua Terra brand new for under $2,500. So I think that's one area where shopping pre-owned really gives you kind of the edge. You can get something that would, money. Exactly, be otherwise out of the reach. Well, both fantastic picks there. What did you choose for the next tier?
Next one, we're talking about between $2,500 and $5,000, and this one is, God, I really like this watch. So I'm going with Grand Seiko. I think Grand Seiko is an incredible brand. It's been coming up a lot. I think it's often overlooked, but just the quality you get out of a Grand Seiko watch compared to a lot of other things at the same price point is just, it's so much. I mean, the fit and finish on these are second to none. And it's just a beautiful watch. Like this one has a GMT functionality with it.
It's a watch enthusiast watch. It's, you know, I always say like no one owns just a Grand Seiko and owns no other watches. It's a brand that you arrive at after owning and experiencing several other high-end watches. And it's simply because what that brand delivers for the money is fantastic. I think pre-owned this is just under $5,000.
It barely makes it.
But I mean, you're getting a beautiful dial. I think this is the one inspired by the snow on Mount Iwate.
It is.
High beat movement, Zaratsu polish. It's still though a sporty, dressy watch, 100 meters water resistant, screw down crown and case back, and of course, display case back as well. You get, that is not your average Seiko movement. That is the Grand Seiko finishing, the full kit there. High beat rate. Beautiful, beautiful watch. And I was really tempted to pick a Grand Seiko for this one too. Yeah,
this one, kind of see the texture on the dial there, which for me, that's kind of, that's one of the big boxes that Grand Seiko ticks. Their dials are just so gorgeous. They're beautiful. They're done so well. And this one has, you know, that texture and finishing on it. And one thing I like is it's kind of subtle. You don't see it like, you know, on your wrist from across the room. It just looks like a nice white dial. Then when you get up close, you actually see the detail in it, and it's really impressive.
Yeah, and another thing too, I mean, it's kind of like the Aqua Terra. It's not overtly dressy and formal, but it's more of a class. You don't have a tool rotating bezel. But at the same time, also worth pointing out on this one, you know, screw down crown, but it is a local jumping hour GMT. So, and right in there, you don't need the 12-hour bezel because, or the 24-hour bezel rather, because you've got that scale along the inner bezel there. So you get that high degree of functionality, dual time zones, great for travel, but
a very clean look.
Very clean. You know, if you were wearing this as your business travel watch, swap it onto a leather strap, pair it with the suit, go into the meeting, and no one's batting an eye twice about it. Where Planet Ocean GMT might not have quite the same border
Sure, it
versatility.
doesn't quite fit in as well. But
That's a fantastic choice.
Let's go on. What did you get for this category?
So this was actually a category where I considered two. I considered a 5500 because you can get those for under $5,000, which I think is for a vintage Rolex a great deal.
Right.
Full stop. But I made that decision in real life. Maybe I chose not to do that decision just to do something different.
Sure.
And I also wanted to do an entry-level Panerai because you can get your feet wet with Panerai if you just, entry-level Luminor for just under $5 as well. But then another brand struck my mind, and I'm like, well, this might be the de facto pick in this price category, and that's Tudor.
This is good.
So, come on, it's hard to have a discussion about great luxury watches under $5,000 without mentioning Tudor.
Yeah.
And on pre-owned with a budget of $5,000, most models are on the table.
Right.
So the one for me I chose was the Black Bay 58. This is obviously the black version. I think if I was going to buy one money today, I'd buy the blue. Only because I have a bunch of black dial sports watches. I think the black is a bit more versatile. Obviously, the gilt kind of finish can be a bit more divisive, but you're getting a dive watch from the greater Rolex umbrella parent company. Well under $5,000.
Yeah.
And I mean, it wears so nicely. It's not just 2 millimeters smaller from a diameter perspective. It's quite a bit thinner, and at least on my wrist, it just wears. It wears kind of like a vintage sub, but in the modern execution of it, and I love that. That just checks so many boxes.
It is. It's almost a perfect balance of that vintage inspired without being a copy or reissue, but also paired with the modern features and looks and updated technology and all that. And it's just such a good choice. And for me, this category is kind of where Tudor kills it, right? Like you chose, the Black Bay here, but there's plenty of other options in there, like the Pelagos is another.
The Pelagos on paper for under $5,000 blows us out of the water. It's a more capable watch. It's a bit big for my wrist.
Sure.
Again, Panerai notwithstanding, but man, I mean, take your pick. Choose the one you want and buy it. Most are under $5,000.
Yeah. But it's a great looking watch.
Two very different watches here. I mean, I want a time-only display with a very kind of Thule-oriented external timing bezel. You went with all the Zaratsu and features, very refined package.
Both watches a ton of features and value and quality for under a $5,000.
Yeah, and also in-house.
Yep.
Grand Seiko Zaga's notoriously everything's in-house, even on the low end. Tudor, what they're putting in this one is their in-house Kanisi manufactured movement. So what you're getting is objectively a lot of watch from your money, both from like the horological sense as well as just the on paper what's delivered in your hand. And I think there's definitely room for both of these in the collection.
This is good. This is a fun price point. There's a lot.
This is a fun one.
Yeah,
this is a fun one. I think the next one was one I struggled with a lot. I had too many. I wanted to throw
the next
in there.
one was tougher for me. Let's start with you and. Let's see what you got first. So this is the between $5,000 and $10,000.
So again, in this price range, if we're talking retail prices, a lot of Rolex sport watches fall in that sweet spot right under 10. You're not buying a Pepsi GMT for under $10,000. Period. Like that's just not happening. So I'm trying to think about what exists on the open market that in that 5 to 10 range is great, just great, and what you'd want. And then it kind of struck me, I think, none of this would be complete without a Speedmaster. So that's what I went there. Obviously, you can find a Speedmaster, like a classic moon watch, for under $5,000. And so you may want to consider that. Just go $4,900 and change or whatever can get your feet wet the moon watch. If I'm doing the 5 to 10, I'd probably get the modern day moon watch with a 3861, has Heslite Sapphire, take your pick. But I own a moon watch. So again, kind of supplementary rather than making my exact same decisions twice.
And there's a lot of choices in this category when it comes to Speedmasters, right?
And and Speedmasters are also one of those ones where you can have one and you want more.
Right. Yeah.
Like like I have a Speedmaster and I want multiple other Speedmasters. So I'm just going at it from the perspective of this is your first Speedmaster.
Right.
Or it's one that's going to exist alongside others at some point. So I went for the FOIS because the new ones have that classic professional case, which you're going to find on some of the vintage models, except the very earliest 321 ones. And so there's a lot more open-ended in that professional category, whereas this, it's got that the no crown guards without the twisted lugs. It looks like the Ed White, but it doesn't have the 321. And so if you had this and then wanted a standard Speedmaster professional moon watch later, you could have both, and they're different enough. So you can still get these, you can still find them. I believe Omega stopped selling them at a retail level. They're a numbered edition, so each one, if you flip it over, will have an individual number on it. They're not limited per se by an explicit number, but each one has its own number, and they only did them for a while. So I think it's a great Speedmaster to have alongside other Speedmasters, but also a great Speedmaster that if it was your only watch, you wouldn't feel like you were lacking anything. It hits all the Speedmaster Moonwatch traits, but it's just different enough that when you go to the watch meetup, you don't have the same one as someone else.
Right, exactly. I love it. And, you know, Speedmasters, like we've talked, there's a million different variants, and they go from very classic to very wild. And this one is just, like you said, it's not the standard Moonwatch that you always see, but it's just different enough to be classic and kind of not the same one you see all day long.
The little details, and they add up to a much greater overall impact where different hands, different dial, different case, all the little things, but ultimately this versus the standard Moonwatch, they're different timepieces.
They're different, and I really like this one. I like the hands. I like the fact that it doesn't have the twisted lugs. Like you said, it's the little details that kind of add up to a
and
really
yes,
good
you
watch.
don't have a coaxial movement in this one, but again, you're probably going to end up with one of the current production ones at a later point in time anyway. Grab these while you can because they're not going to get easier or cheaper to find. This is sort of a cult favorite within this greater Moonwatch canon, and it makes sense to buy these now because they just released that new one at the beginning of the year. They're going to be making that 3861 Moonwatch for years and years and years to come. You'll have an opportunity to buy that even at retail. This, grab it while you can. It's worth it, and I mean,
it's timeless, right?
Like it's timeless. I mean, it's almost like an uninspired choice to choose a Speedmaster. It's just an obvious one, like a sub, but at the same time, there's a reason. It's the expected choice. It's because it's objectively great. You can get it on the low side of the 5 to 10 grouping, and it went to the moon.
Sure.
Like, the speed is great.
I'm glad you made this choice. This is a really good watch, and I was hoping and expecting to see a Speedmaster in here, and I didn't choose one, even though I really wanted to. I mean, it's kind of it's always tough to pick your favorite.
That'd be kind of awkward.
But I'm glad it did show up. I think it's a really good choice. I actually went a little different way, and for me, this is the price range where we start getting into some good Rolex. There are some other, you can get a Rolex, which, like, I talked about this one, the Air King that I almost chose for the $5,000 tier, but there was just too many other watches that I felt offered you more at that price point. At this one, this is where I think you really start getting your money in on Rolex. And while you went on kind of the bottom end of the spectrum, I think this one barely makes that $10,000 cutoff. But I went with the Polar Dial GMT. I think it's a beautiful watch. It's the older variant, but it's just such a classic watch. It's a GMT Rolex. You're never going to go wrong with this watch. And it comes in the black and the white dial. Personally, I love white dials. I think this one's just so clean looking that got my nod. But there's
I love
other
the Polar
variations.
Explorer too. I mean, it didn't used to have the hype around it that it does now. It used to just trade hands significantly under what you'd expect to pay for a comparable black sub.
Right.
But the Explorer 2 has taken off, and for my smaller wrist, the 42 is quite a bit bigger. I love these 40 mil. I mean, my favorite Rolex of all time is the first Explorer 2, the 1655. So obviously, I have a soft spot for that collection as a whole. But the white dial is so different than what you're going to find, with your subs, your GMTs, and if you owned this with a fleet of other black dial Rolex sport watches, it's going to immediately stand out. At under 10 grand, it's also it's crazy to call a watch this old a bargain at almost 10 grand, but at the same time, they're not getting easier to buy. For me, who loves the Explorer 2 and the last 2 generations basically are off the table for me. This is kind of the de facto one to choose. And I mean, if you've got the budget of 10 and want to play at the upper end, why not?
Exactly.
Steel Rolex sports watch. It's kind of blue chip as far as watches
and like
go.
you were mentioning, it's that perfect size. It's 40 millimeters, where it's not too small if you like big watches, and it's not too big if you like small watches. It kind of fits right in there. Again, it looks good on leather, and Explorer 2 is just it's a classic Rolex, right? It's just such a classic model that at that $10,000, even though we're just kind of barely scraping under that $10,000 price point, I think it's a great choice, and I'd be happy to pull the trigger on it.
Yeah, another thing to consider is I know there's some people who have a problem paying appreciably more for a pre-owned Rolex sports watch because they can't get the retail price out of their mind.
Right.
It doesn't matter that you can't buy it at retail.
Right.
That's not the point. It's just they have a hard time with that mental obstacle of I'm paying $18,000 for a $10,000
Sure.
watch or whatever. But when you're shopping for something that simply doesn't exist at a retail
Yes,
level,
much less of a
whatever
concern here.
originally sold for back in the day, it's irrelevant. It's what is the price of it today.
Right.
And so for me, I have almost an easier time justifying the price of this at $10,000 than the latest and greatest insert ceramic sports watch here.
Yeah.
Simply because I love this case silhouette, and it now only exists at a level that is beyond it.
Right. Yeah. Well, I think this is a good choice. Both of these in this category. I think that's a really great pair. Choosing watches under 10 grand.
Yeah, and at very different spectrums of it. And
Yes.
I mean, I'm not shocked at all that once you start getting above 5 grand, we're seeing Rolex and Omega both make an appearance and going head to head at this price point. This is the one where the budget really starts to open up, and you get these fan favorites, these icons, the Speedmaster, Rolex sports watches in there. So I'm excited to see what the last two we've got on the table are.
Let's move on.
So what did you get in the next price category, which is at this point 10 to 25? That's a lot of money to play with.
There's a lot of stuff in here. There was a lot of watches to choose from, and it took some considering for sure. But I went Rolex again, Rolex sport watch. I went a little newer. A little newer. Yeah. So this is the new Rolex Submariner, the green dial, the Cermet as it's kind of being called, which I love it. I mean, I love the Submariner. When this came out, I'm a fan of green anyway. Green's my favorite color, so I've always been into the Hulk and Kermit, and it's Rolex's color, so I dig that. And when this came out with the black dial, the black dial and the green ceramic bezel, it's just such a good-looking watch, just such a great combo. And again, this one is one that, if you were able to buy it retail, you'd be close to that $10,000 mark, but we're not, so here we are. And still, I think that, it's a great choice for the 10 to 25,000 because you really can't get it at retail.
It's a steel sub. Yeah, it's a steel sub. I think, yes, the Hulk's a bit more unique because it's got that green sunburst style. This is a bit more wearable, but still being a green Submariner. I'm a big fan of it. Yeah. So this makes sense.
And if you wanted something else, you could get. I mean, it comes in the black. If you're more into the classic Submariner look, you
Personally,
could get the black dial.
I'd get green.
I'd get the green too, but that Rolex Submariner I feel like has to make an appearance, and for this. For this category, I think this is where I really, hit it out of the park. And personally, for me, it's the new one with the green ceramic bezel.
Yeah, definitely. It's again one of those watches where you could own it alongside other Rolex, and there wouldn't be too much overlap. I also went Rolex at this price category, but with $25,000, that's quite a lot to play with. With kind of a minimum price of 10 grand, it's also a price point where this isn't going to be my beater.
Sure.
This is not going to be the watch I'm putting on when I'm working on the car in the yard. So at that point, I want to go get something a little bit more special, something that isn't the go anywhere, do anything, be rough with it tool.
All right.
But I still love those watches. I still love those watches. So I went vintage. Vintage Rolex.
Oh, very good.
1675 GMT with a fuchsia dial, fuchsia bezel matte dial. I love vintage Rolex, but just the nature of them, if you had to tell me to choose one of these watches to go treat roughly, I'd choose the sub.
Sure.
But I'm not going to be treating my $25,000 watch all that roughly. And at this point, I want something with a little, a bit more unique, some collector pizzazz, something that I won't necessarily be able to get back if I pass on it now in the future.
Sure.
Now, I'm pretty confident I'll be able to get a Cermet. It might cost me a lot more if I wait a number of years, but I may not be able to get this same GMT. Love the patina on it. Love that it still has its jangly rivet bracelet. And for me, this is one of those ones where they're not making this one anymore. I mean, they haven't been making this one for decades. And so there is that limited number that are available, and that number is only going to be getting smaller. The number in collectible, nice, original condition, only going to be getting smaller. And so, although between these two watches here, I might choose the sub over this if it was going to be my everyday watch, but I'm assuming it's not going to be a my everyday watch. I'm going to just go for the collectible one with that, the wabi-sabi and scratch marks and all.
Yeah. And that's perfectly acceptable, especially at this price point. I feel like this is where you start to get to something a little more special. Like you said, something you're not going to be wearing when you're wrenching on the car. And I love it. I think this is a great choice for that. And this one is nice because it's not something you can, find something similar somewhere else. I mean, this watch is, especially with that bezel, I mean, it's pretty unique. I mean,
and part of the reason why I chose the fuchsia is I love this steel ceramic Pepsi on the Jubilee. That's such a great watch for me. And if you owned this and that one, you got one in red and blue. You've got the fuchsia. They're different watches, different colors. I can totally justify it.
I think it's a great choice, and I love seeing that vintage in there because. I
realized I hadn't chose a vintage. I love vintage, and I feel like with 25 grand, that really opens up the table. You have a lot of different things within that category, and I felt like we needed a GMT.
I agree. And I think that the choice for a vintage here is a good choice because vintage. You could spend upwards of six figures, millions. I mean, like millions, really, there is no limit on what you can spend on a vintage watch. And this one, what you're getting for, and granted, $25,000 is not a small sum of money, but for this watch and this kind of unique Rolex piece and something that looks so nice
relative to all the six-figure subs,
all the other like crazy high-end expensive vintage stuff, I think this is a really good choice, and I love the way it looks. And the GMT-Master is just such a classic watch that.
And the other thing that I'm sort of considering with this choice is it's not an insignificant amount of money that if I wanted to move it and liquidate it and get that other grail that just rose its head at the right point in time, it's a steel vintage Rolex sports watch.
Sure.
That's about as liquid as you can get. If I need to sell, I can sell it that same day, get market price for it, and that frees up a significant amount of capital to get whatever it is I'm after next. But at this price point, I'm starting to think about the liquidity of the model. If it's not something that I plan on keeping forever, it might be my forever watch now, but people, preferences, situations change.
Up later. And we didn't even mention that, with the current way these vintage Rolexes have been appreciating in value.
This might not be a $25,000 watch in another 10 years.
It's really not. If you change your mind in a couple of years, you're probably making a few grand at least, and you can put it somewhere else. And
I've never looked at a vintage Rolex watch and been like, oh, I'm happy I'm buying it now versus X number of years ago. It usually doesn't work that way. Full on.
Should we do the big one?
Yeah, budget's off. What are you picking? It has to be at least 25 grand.
Okay.
But sky's the limit beyond that.
This was another one where I kind of rotated through a few choices. A fun one to pick. I went Rolex again, and I went with the gold Daytona with the green sunburst dial. I love Daytona. It's like one of my favorite watches. I think that the current white dial Daytona is my favorite production Rolex right now. So I got a soft spot in my heart for Daytonas, and this one is just. It's just so unique and classic, and there's a lot of hype around it right now, which is what's driving that price up to that $50,000 to $100,000 range that we're looking at watches. It's just so unique and so nice, and I'm not a huge fan of gold. So when I see a gold watch, that I'm like, oh, I love that. It's so good. Like it gets like extra points for me because I know I'm not a default gold guy. So
and it's a really unique one. I can't imagine this green, like shiny green, red accents gold watch is going to be something Rolex keeps around in different permutations. Obviously, it's quite special, and it is a Rolex, so it's tough enough to stand up to the rigors of daily wear. Despite all of its luxurious nature, I didn't go Rolex on this category.
Okay. There's some good other options, not Rolex.
Rolex is probably the world's single most famous luxury manufacturer, but when you think about the spectrum of prices, they're not the most expensive.
No.
So I figured at this point, well, let's get our feet wet with some of the higher end brands, and I went with a Patek Philippe. But I always said if I was going to buy a Patek, I'd buy something in precious metal and something really complicated, and that is not what I did today at all. Obviously, platinum grand complication might be my first choice, but I realized we had a 5711 in stock, and again, weighing the liquidity thing of it, and also weighing just what this would say about me on my wrist, I chose this one. What this means is you chose the most hype watch in modern history, the 5711, then specifically chose not to get the hype dial variant of it. You didn't get the blue, you went for the odd one. But what this is it's like a six-figure watch, time and date, in stainless steel. It's supremely comfortable. Honestly, this is one of the most comfortable watches I've ever worn. And I've always liked the 5711. Prices have gotten to the point where I'm never going to be a player in this game.
Right.
But when you really start thinking about, what watch on our site with a blank budget you want, this one, I think and not because I love it so much or more than a platinum grand complication, but I'm thinking about 20 years from now, looking back at the collecting landscape, and just going, wow, that was crazy, when
Yeah.
people were spending hundreds of thousands of dollars on a steel time and date, you know,
Yes.
just a steel sports watch. I think what the 5711 has come to represent is just the peak of that hype and all of that,
Right.
just this general new wave of watch collecting that wasn't really the case, you know, more than over 10 years ago. And so from just something as like a totem of watch collecting culture, God, it's hard not to take a
is.
5711, but you're not taking it in the blue dial execution. So it's sort of one of those ones where it's like making a different choice. I don't know if it's trying to be more self-aware, just trying not to jump on the hype bandwagon, but I really like the white dial. I think the date window matches really well with it, better than the blue.
Yeah.
And it's the one we had in stock, and I'm shocked we had it in stock, so.
I kind of am too. Right off, it's a gorgeous watch. I love this watch. It is a more classic and timeless choice than, like, you know, a Grand Complication and precious metals and all that.
Well, I got a little bit of precious metal there. There's a gold rotor, right?
There is a gold rotor, and I mean, and you get the display back that's, you know, finished just absolutely beautifully. And also the white dial. I love the white dial. I'm with you on that one. I know the blue is, you know, that's the most classic look and it's the most hyped up. But me, just objectively speaking, I think the white dial looks better. So you know, if I had the choice between the two, I would go with the white. So I think this is a great choice at that price point. Like you said, it's kind of, you know, the epitome of, like, you know, top tier watch collecting, and you know, it's always going to be fantastic. It's always going to be in demand.
And if I decided at whatever point I didn't want a 5711, I promise you I would have zero problems finding a buyer for it, finding a nice trade lined up,
Yep.
and would probably end up coming out on top of it. So,
Yeah,
you know,
so-
it's one of those ones where, again, the liquidity factor, even if it's your forever watch, if in 5, 10, 15, 20 years time that changes, I mean, it's blue chip.
Yeah.
It just kind of, it's easy to get rid
And
of.
if you are looking for something like, you know, the Patek Philippe, you really, I mean, you got to hit it in this category. There's not a whole lot of really good stuff anywhere else, like, you know, in our category for today. I mean, they do have watches there, but really when you get to, like, you know, what you want out of the Patek, it's, you know, it's got to be this top tier.
Yeah, I almost go back and forth between I want something really, really complicated from Patek, because they do that so well. But at the same time, I don't want to pay those service prices for the Grand Complication, Perpetual Calendar, Chrono, Moonphase. This is going to be a lot easier to digest when the time comes to get it serviced. So from a daily wear standpoint, because again, blank budget, you know, if we were going to keep it, you know, that's a great watch to wear all day, every day, and just flex 24/7, 365.
Yeah.
Well, really interesting lineups. Very different lineups.
Very different lineups. I think we had some really good choices at all the categories. I was interested and kind of happy to see some of the ones that you got, because they were ones that had crossed my mind too. So it just goes to show that, you know, no matter what your budget is, there's some good choices there. You can get a lot of watch for your money, no matter where you're
What's
looking.
funny is I chose all steel sports watches.
You did choose all steel sports watches. I chose more Rolex, but again, a lot of sport watches, even like the Aqua Terra, which isn't, you know, it's not a dive watch per se, but it's very sporty. Same thing with the Grand Seiko. It's, you know, it's pretty sporty. So yeah, we definitely leaned higher on the sports side today, but good. It's a good rounded collection.
Yeah, and again, again, we're looking at one watch within each respective price category. Sure. If I was going to go buy 5 watches, I'd probably pick in precious metal, something more dressy.
Yeah, balance it out a little bit.
But I do live a pretty active lifestyle. If I had to own one watch at any of these price categories, you know, I'd kind of gravitate towards these, something steel and sporty. Probably now would be the best time to mention the giveaway.
You can win a $5,000 voucher that can be put towards any watch on bobswatches.com. This is your chance to get your dream watch. All you need to do to enter is to subscribe to Bob's Watches YouTube channel, follow Bob's Watches on Instagram, and leave a comment below telling us your pick for the 5 different watches in the different price categories. Stay tuned on our social channels for when we're going to announce the winner, and the rest of the information can be found in the link below.
So these are our picks, but obviously these could have gone a number of different ways. So don't forget to tell us in the comments what you thought of the watches we chose, and also the watches you would have chosen instead of the ones we picked. Thanks for watching our video on the best watches at 5 different prices. Don't forget to like and subscribe to our YouTube channel so that you can stay up to date on our latest video content.